and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I'm really excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by OfferingTree. OfferingTree is your one-stop shop for all things yoga business. This means your website, your scheduling software, your payment software, your course software, your membership software, your video on-demand software, and much more, all for one price with one password per month. OfferingTree really is my favorite software for yoga teachers, so make sure you go check it out at offeringtree.com/MBOM, and I'm going to tell you more about them later on in the episode. This week on the podcast, I'm really excited to be joined by Kristie Nichol. Kristie is a 500-hour registered yoga teacher and a registered CPA who's based in Canmore, Alberta. Her and I have known each other for a little over a year at this point, and we're both really aligned with supporting yoga teachers with their yoga businesses. And I'm so grateful that somebody like Kristie exists to support yoga teachers with finances and tax and accounting prep and all of that good stuff. So in this week's episode of the show, Kristie talks about how to get prepared for this year's tax season, as well as some of her top tips for getting organized and staying on top of your financials to help make tax season less of a burden. She also shares the importance of having a relationship with your finances and how working with an accountant, a bookkeeper, or using a software can really help with this. So we're not going through the specific nitty-gritty of actually, how to file taxes and all that stuff, but we're talking more about how to actually prepare and organize this type of stuff, and some tips for if you weren't that organized for 2021 tax season, which we're doing in the next couple of months, how to get organized for the following year. So we're really going to hit 2022 with a lot of organization and getting on top of everything, and Kristie has some amazing tips to share. So without further ado, here she is. Welcome to the podcast today, Kristie. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm stoked to dive in with you. And can you share where you're joining us from today?
I'm in Canmore, Alberta.
Amazing. Yeah, that's how, well, actually, it's kind of interesting. We know each other through our mutual friend, Chelsea Brita, and she introduced us because we were both living in Canmore, which was such a cool connection because I know her through my 200-hour training and you know her through your 300-hour training, which is just such a small world.
Yeah. And then we just meet in a small mountain town after meeting, Chelsea in the jungle, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Well, I'm excited to get into all things like tax preparation, financial preparation, all of that good stuff. But before we get there, can you tell me a little bit about your yoga journey and how you got into yoga?
Yeah, of course. I took my very first yoga class when I was in high school. It was like a yoga class in a gym. And it's funny to me now because the very first class, I couldn't stop laughing. I found it really funny, the whole soft speaking and everything. And then I got into Shavasana and was like, ooh, like, what is this? And I just remember since then, like as a teenager, taking the bus, walking, like getting to this class however I could. And for quite a long time, yoga was kind of just in the background of my experience, supporting me through university. It was just something I kind of did as a part of my everyday kind of life. And then when I really got into kind of higher education and my stress levels went kind of skyrocketing, yoga became this really beautiful balance to complement. Essentially, I would sit all day and study and use my brain and not move my body. And so I found I really needed this outlet to learn how to turn off my mind and to utilize my body. And so it really did help me get through a lot of my education. It ended up being like a bit of a study ritual for me as well. Like right before my exams, I would study really hard. And then it was like, I need to stop and I need to go to yoga. And there's kind of, you've almost done as much as you can to prepare. And then it's like, how much can you actually relax and calm down before those kind of big exams? So that's kind of how I got into it. And of course, it was this passion of mine while I was studying accounting and more of this maybe traditional knowledge. So it was a really cool complement and eventually overtook my traditional studies for quite a period of my time. So it was really cool.
Yeah. That was sort of similar to my journey as well. I feel like yoga was such a big part of my like university years. And then my years after that, working full time and just having so much stress in my life. And I'm curious, at what point were you like, hey, I'm going to do a yoga teacher training? Because you're a certified accountant, which is obviously like it's like a pretty solid career by most people's terms. It pays well, those types of things. Like what kind of inspired you? Like, hey, I'd like to go take a training and maybe teach this.
Yeah, I started to realize that I would get up and go to the 6 a.m. class before I go to work at the firm. And it just became very apparent to me that that was the best part of my day, that was the part where I felt the most myself and the most natural and the most happy. And that kind of gave me the capacity to do this other aspect of my life. But really, when it came down to it, it was how did I feel when doing both of these aspects of my life. And at one point it just got to the point where I didn't have the time and the availability to really do a yoga teacher training kind of part-time or just take a class. And it became, the pull became so strong that I had to know more. And I found that, there's only so much history and philosophy that you can teach in a public, or you can learn from in a public yoga class. So I actually, I at the time was doing forensic accounting. So studying or looking into financial crime. And I went into work one day and just said, I think I'm going to India. I'm done. And it was kind of an eat, pray, love dramatic fashion of I'm leaving the corporate world to go to India. And but funny enough, when I got to India, that archetype or that storyline is actually quite common. There was a lawyer from Amsterdam who also had left her law career to come and was in our training. And so I think there's it is kind of a natural, as maybe crazy as it sounds, it is somewhat of a normal process for people to feel. And there's also a really interesting book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, I believe. And it's the same kind of storyline, same kind of archetype, the corporate person that wants to find more. And so I left my job and went to India for 3 months and just lived in the ashram and really dove into all things yoga. Obviously, when you're there, it's not just something that you study and then can walk away from. It's ingrained in the whole culture. It's ingrained in everything you do. It's really steeped in all aspects. So that's kind of what inspired me to become a yoga teacher. It was almost like this pull I couldn't not listen to.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And so getting back from India after a couple of months, were you still kind of like, hey, I'm following this like path of a yoga teacher? Or were you like, hey, I'm like maybe ready to step back into corporate in some capacity? Or like, where were you at when you got back from that training?
Oh yeah, I was a wide-eyed brand new yoga teacher that was going to, share this with absolutely everyone. And I love that passion. And there's a practicality that eventually had me find a bit more of a middle path, taking just kind of a usual 9 to 5 accounting job while building that baseline. Because I think that's something that often we don't realize takes some care and finesse is to become full-time passion dweller or yoga teacher or whatnot is, it takes time to build that community, I think is kind of the first and most important thing. So yeah, I really allowed myself the space to get to know the yoga community where I was and start practice teaching. That was one thing my teacher always told me was just start teaching. Doesn't matter if you're teaching in a park with your friends, just kind of get over that initial hurdle to start doing it. So yeah, I kind of did both for quite a while, and still do both, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit about like just being able to blend, your passion of teaching yoga with working with yoga teachers to help them with taxes and accounting. How did you kind of like step into, I guess, like deciding that, hey, I could actually use this like skill set I have from my degree to like help people in the yoga space?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting journey back to accounting as well, is after becoming a yoga teacher and having such maybe a sour experience with the corporate structure as it was. For a long time, I was, don't call me an accountant. I'm not an accountant. Don't call me that. I really rejected that side of myself. But it was in Costa Rica in my 300-hour training that I realized that was something that I was rejecting within myself and wasn't, it didn't have to be that way. And then just from talking to so many amazing people that I had met from this yoga community, people that had a lot of passion for, environment, for psychology, for, yoga, and people who genuinely want to make the world a better place. And then them finding that the business part was a barrier for their expression to be fully realized. So, I have a really great yoga teacher friend who I think is just like, I would sit and take all of her classes. She's so great. But part of her genius is in the creative aspect and not so much in the structured business corporate aspect. And I mean, even as someone who was, really ingrained in that system, I didn't feel sometimes like my softer side, my creative side was welcomed. It was very linear. It was very, almost patriarchal. And if I had trouble with that, then I can imagine people without that background really feeling pushed out and not welcome in that space. And so that's when it became clear to me that I could be a bit of a translator in that regard of helping people understand business and finances and navigate kind of the technical, nerdy tax part, which I do still love. I am very much, there's a reason I did that much accounting. I do love it. Helping them navigate that. And then as well, helping people project into their business things that maybe aren't so corporately understood, like having goals around environmentalism or goals around, student development instead of it all being about money. And so that was something that I also really believe can be metrics in your business, and want to help people cultivate that as well. So, knowing that like you could make a bigger profit if you did X, Y, and Z, but if that's at the expense of, maybe some of your core values or your bigger objectives, then like, let's not do that at all. So that was kind of my desire to go back into accounting, was strictly to, again, only work with really rad people and align with people who have passion and be able to be that translator for them.
Yeah, I really love that. And I feel really connected to your journey because I feel like mine was kind of similar, like coming from a business background, working in corporate and really having this like I call it kind of like my career U-turn where I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I feel like I did have also this sort of rejection of this part of myself. And it kind of took a little bit to acknowledge that, like, this part of myself is okay. And it's actually, good, and it can be really great. And I can support people with the skills that I have and the passions that I have. And, there's nothing wrong with being like a yogi who's like spiritual and enjoys, that aspect of things while also being rooted in, the business side of things and understanding that and having a mind for that and wanting to support people with that. And I think the reality is that so many people, like in the yoga space and many other industries as well, like really struggle with this aspect, and it kind of keeps them from sharing their gifts with other people. And so it's cool that we're able to support people in that way. And as somebody who does not have a mind for taxes and accounting, I'm so grateful that, you exist as somebody that's like, to me, I look at you as like somebody who understands like the work I do and is trustworthy, which is like huge. It's so hard to find somebody, I think, in like accounting and taxes that you can speak like their language with. You can like speak a language of like spirituality and like yoginess while also like, I trust that like, the CRA is not coming after me because we did this wrong type thing, which is something we need. Right. So I think it's really beautiful that you've been able to find this balance and this blend.
Yeah, thanks. I really do feel that like accountants should be a part of your business team and being a part of, not just someone that you maybe come to for, filings, but is someone that you can talk strategy with, that you can tell your desires about where your company is going to go. And in a lot of those conversations is where kind of the magic and the medicine comes through of unifying that knowledge. And again, as to what you were saying of like, if you don't feel connected with that person, if you feel like there's if there's no fluidity there and there's no connection, then, how deeply are you really going to share what you want and what you hope for? And like you said, know that person understands that. And what I do is take that information and then scan and kind of see what are the business opportunities, what are the things that, I can hear from you that maybe you don't see from a business lens. Maybe there's tax planning opportunities from that, but it's really the conversation where all of that, that creation comes from. It's not just the filings. And that's something that I've kind of learned over the last little while, in doing, accounting for, holistic practitioners and yogis, is that it's great to do your filing. It's great to know the CRA isn't coming after you. And there's a lot more opportunity, just through the conversation and doing that kind of planning, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe let's get into some of that kind of like planning, since, tax and accounting season is right around the corner. It always creeps up really fast as soon as the turn of the new year happens. And I feel like this is one thing that maybe for a lot of like spiritual entrepreneurs or yoga teachers, it's like one of these things that we just want to avoid for like most of the year. And then we have to, spend a couple of days, a whole day, whatever it takes to kind of get everything organized. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like, just best practices and what we need to know for getting ourselves organized for this time of year.
Yeah, I would say for this tax season, we're in whatever your history for this year is perfectly fine. If you were organized, if you weren't organized, it's all good. You still have the opportunity to work with where we're at right now. So for this year, I would definitely say the first thing is to talk to your accountant or do a little bit of research to find out what is deductible. So what you're able to kind of write off as expenses. And then from there, taking your receipts, first off, finding them all is the first. They're usually scattered. So just give yourself, maybe a chunk of time. And I always like to have the intention with that time especially when I'm doing things that I'm not that, pumped to do, is how do I want to feel when I do this? So if I have a task ahead of me that I'm really not into, I'll say, I want to feel focused when I do this thing, or I want to feel confident as I gather these receipts. You're not going to feel necessarily as stoked as I will in preparing for your taxes, perhaps, but there is an opportunity to just acknowledge that you want to have some presence in doing this, and that you want to do it to nurture your business. I always think of like a business and your creation as like this living thing. And so you do have to, maybe feed it when you don't want to, or, you're tired, but it is this thing to nurture. So just kind of have a bit of an intention that I'm going to be purposeful and focused and spend these next 3 hours just gathering my things. And so go through the emails, go through the receipts, get everything together, feel really good about that. That's a huge step if that's as far as you get in one day. And then it's really helpful to organize them. So instead of dropping off the shoebox of receipts to your accountant, and again, just here, I don't want to deal with this, take the time to really get to know your business financially, and just taking those, even your revenues. So if you have different revenue streams, like maybe you teach yoga classes and you do workshops and you do some teacher training, or you do some one-on-one mentorship, put all of that money, categorize it, because that'll also help you see like where you maybe are the most profitable, maybe where you might even feel where you feel the most joy. It might not be where the most profitable is, but where do you feel the most joy in those areas? Acknowledge that, and acknowledge that maybe this other avenue makes more money. So how can you balance those two? And then same with expenses. So, putting all your coffee receipts into one area, all of your software, all of your yoga blocks and supplies, and just kind of have totals. And then from that point, it's easier to take those categories and line them up with tax categories, or to give them to your accountant in certain categories. Just saves a lot of time. And I'm also a big proponent of people understanding their business financially, and not just handing it off and turning a blind eye and saying, give it to my accountant, I don't want to deal with this, because there's a lot of value in your own confidence if you understand your finances, if you understand where the money's going and where the money's coming in. Then, as I do find a lot of hardship around this type of work, it comes from just the discomfort of not knowing. And then the discomfort of not knowing might shy you away from certain opportunities. Or, the more you understand your financials, maybe you can go into that meeting for sponsorship or collaborations, knowing that you have sturdy feet. So yeah, I would find out what's deductible, categorize it, organize it. And that's what I would kind of do from this point on. For next year, for the upcoming year, maybe planning to take that type of commitment into a more steady implementation. So doing that maybe monthly, saying I'm going to take this couple hours a month, have your kind of gather all that energy and really build yourself up, pump your tires to get it done. Because I also feel that knowing where you are financially throughout the year is really where the magic happens. Your tax time and your financial statements are kind of like a historical roadmap of this is where we've been, and this is kind of where the cards lie at the end of the year. But, at the end of the year, if you're not making if you're not financially where you hope to be, then if you do this mid-year, you do this a couple times a year, then halfway through, you can kind of have that check and being like, wow, this actually was so great, or this felt really great, which is something I often feel is I can do a workshop, I can do something, and it feels like so rewarding and so lovely. And at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't pay the bills. And so it's good to balance those, because I find with yoga teaching and doing the work that I'm so grateful to do, it doesn't take a lot for me to feel like I'm a millionaire, even if I made $50. Like I feel so great, and that is great. But again, finding that practicality that you also deserve to live the life you want financially, and not have to stress about that, so yeah, to expand on that. So throughout the year, make this more of a regular commitment, and utilize technology. I think accounting has come leaps and bounds in really cool ways as far as cloud software. So for example, the receipts that you used to keep in your purse that get all kind of faded and you can't even read them anymore. There's now technologies, apps. One's called HubDoc, where you just take a picture of your receipt and it categorizes it virtually. And then you don't need to keep the paper. And then there's also accounting software, like one is called Xero, Xero, and it will actually integrate into HubDoc. So you take a picture of your receipt and then it will go right into your accounting, and you can set these kind of bookkeeping rules that every time you go to Eclipse Coffee, it knows it's meals and entertainment, and it just files it and actually does the entries for you. And then at the end of the month, you can just go through and say, yes, you put this in the right place, or just send that to your bookkeeper and your bookkeeper can do that part for you. But it is a lot, it's a lot more modern and user-friendly than we might have imagined before. So use technology to your benefit, and stay on top of it just so you can plan and support your creations.
Hey, yoga teachers. We're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk a little bit more about OfferingTree. If you've been teaching free yoga classes for a while, it might be time to start charging. I know when you hear that, you might cringe a little bit inside. It can be super scary to take the leap to charging for your yoga classes. But here's a way that you can bridge the gap and transition from teaching free to paid classes. And it keeps your yoga classes accessible for everyone. If you're teaching free classes, I recommend giving people the option to pay you. This is really easy to set up in OfferingTree. OfferingTree is the website and software platform I recommend to anyone who's looking to grow their yoga or wellness business. With OfferingTree, you can offer both donation-based and sliding scale payment options for your yoga classes. That means that your students can choose an amount that feels right for them, or pick from a few different pricing options that you've laid out. Instead of receiving random PayPal or Venmo deposits as donations for your free classes, now everything is in one place with OfferingTree. The best part about this is that it's super, super easy to set up, and you can do it right from the same place where you enter your regular price. So whether your class is going to be free, $20, or you want to set sliding scale, it is super, super easy to set up. I'm partnering with OfferingTree to offer a special discount to you, my listeners. If you're looking for a scheduling tool or website that's easy enough for you to set up yourself, go to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for a 15% discount off 1 year of OfferingTree, or 15% off the first 3 months. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. All right, now back to the episode. Thank you for sharing all of that. If we did have one of those years where maybe you weren't organized, I think it's just setting that intention for the next year to maybe bring some more organization into your taxes and accounting. And you bring up a lot of good points about, sometimes it's easy to turn away from our finances and just not want to pay attention to it, and just kind of hand it all to our accountant at the end of the year, or maybe just deal with it at the end of the year. But I think, quite honestly, that's a strategy I tried years ago, and I feel like it just doesn't really work. It doesn't really help to not understand how much money you're making in your business. It doesn't really help to not understand how much is coming in and how much is going out. And it makes it hard to make decisions around can I attend this training, or can I afford this other thing, or can I afford to donate to my favorite charity or something like that. When you don't have any awareness of your money, you can't really make those decisions confidently in your business. And I think it's when we get kind of in these situations where maybe we get surprised by how much tax we owe that year, or we get surprised by, how little or how much we made. And it can make us feel, money can make us feel like all sorts of ways. Right. And I think it's so much better if we can kind of be like, take our own power back with that and kind of empower ourselves with the money that we're bringing in. And I also really love the point you made about how, looking at things regularly gives us this opportunity to understand what's working and what's not working in our business. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be about the money, like it could be, I made $50, but I felt amazing doing this, which means this is something I want to do again. And of course, like girls got to eat, we've got to pay our rent, we've got to be able to afford things. So money is important, but sometimes we can do things that don't necessarily pay us in monetary value. And those can feel really good in our business. And we can, find those opportunities that pay more that maybe we're not as passionate about and find those trade-offs. And I think that just being able to look at that more regularly can really help us understand what to say yes to, what to say no to, what's working, what's not. And it just becomes less scary the more you look at it, I think.
Yeah. And I also think sometimes, to your point around, this might not be my favorite thing to do, but it's paying the bills, that can often change or soften your mindset to enter that space a little bit more joyfully. Because, you have this opportunity to do the things that you're really passionate about. And then that this is the thing that keeps everything else going. And, it might not be your favorite job to do, but you can approach it a little bit softer, knowing that this is the foundation that lets all the fun things happen, instead of maybe resisting it. I think sometimes we think we have to work our passion as a full-time job, or somehow we're failing. And that's not the case at all. You could have a full-time job that pays the bills, and supports all the things you get to do on the sidelines. And just accepting that that's also a very beautiful alternative.
So when it comes to some of the things you were talking about for getting organized for next year, you were mentioning, looking at this more regularly. So maybe having like a time set in your calendar each month, where you can go through this, organize this. And then you also mentioned using software. So being able to take photos of receipts and then just upload them right to bookkeeping software. Do you have any other tips or suggestions or ways that we can kind of just make this a bit simpler for ourselves? Because I think sometimes people who are not, I guess, really into wanting to do this think like, I'll just put it off for the year and that'll be easier. But I think the reality is like spending, an hour a month organizing this or a couple hours a month organizing this is going to be way better in the long run than having to spend like a couple days at the end of the year, the beginning of the new year, having to get your taxes organized.
Yeah, I would definitely say one other thing that makes it really streamlined is to keep your business and your personal separate. So instead of depositing everything kind of into your personal checking account at the end of, or when you do your bookkeeping, then you kind of have to pick out, this was personal, this was business. So if you get a second account, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a business account with your business name, you can just open a second personal checking account that you only use for business transactions. So, if you deposit the check into the business account, even if you then transfer it to you and use the money personally, at least there is what we call like an audit trail of where all the money kind of came in for the business and where it went. So if it went to you personally, or if you paid for an expense, just keeping a separate bank account from your personal bank account. Again, to utilize this software really well is that you would upload the bank account, the statement from that bank account, and all of those transactions kind of get allocated and categorized. And so it is much easier if your personal and your business are separate, and then you're fine to take money from the business and send it to yourself personally and do whatever you want with it. But just keeping that really clear definition. Again, I like to think of your business or your project as something that is living, its own separate entity that you have to nurture and care for. And so just give it its own bank account, so that you can separate where that line in the financial sand is drawn too, that, this is the money for the business, but then, you pay yourself and you have this much money personally. It can help for planning as well, for tax planning. As like you said, if you're not quite sure how much you'll owe at the end of the year, keeping that kind of aside in the business account is really helpful. I think that piece is really key, actually, is to have that plan to pay taxes, to set aside that money in advance, because for one, it's a jilting bill to get all at once if you haven't prepared for it. Nobody really likes that. But also what I find is if you don't calculate or account for the tax portion, potentially you aren't charging enough for your services. Because if what you need personally to feel financially stable and confident is $60 an hour, but you haven't accounted for taxes, then really maybe you need to be charging $80 an hour to pay your tax and to have that same level of personal comfort. So again, making sure that you just keep your eye on all the balls in the air, all the potential components of your business, and taxes is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was actually something that I experienced personally which is why I often bring it up, is like, and all the things we're talking about. I mean, having things be very messy and disorganized and in all the accounts, and having to spend hours just being like, was this work? Was this personal? Is this a personal expense? Is this a work expense? And separating things out, like you mentioned, I think has been obviously way, way easier. And then I think also just, you can go from a place, and obviously this is going to depend where you live, but you can go from a place in your business, and especially I think as like a yoga teacher, where maybe you're not making enough to pay a lot in taxes. And then you have a good year, which is amazing, right? Like it feels so good. And then you get hit with like a massive tax bill, and that can just kind of like shatter that for you. And I think that happened to me maybe 4 years ago. And I was like, never again, never again will I get like, a shocking tax bill that kind of makes me wish that I hadn't made that much money that year. Cause, I went from being so proud of how I'd done in my business to feeling like, oh my God, how am I going to pay this? Cause I just wasn't prepared. And I think this is part of the reason why it can be really great to hire somebody. And having somebody to kind of help you with this, or having a bookkeeping software or something like that, or being on top of things during the year can really prevent that from happening. And, it was my own bad that happened to me, especially as somebody who like took accounting classes. I really shouldn't have allowed that to happen, but it's so easy to just like turn away from it and like kind of pretend like it doesn't exist. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of face that. And I think that being prepared for it feels so much better.
Yeah. And as well, like as somebody who's passionate and has this thing that they want to create, it's natural to want to put your energy toward that aspect of it. I think that's why people do hire bookkeepers and accountants, because, you're a creative person, you have this passion, and that's really where the desire for your energy goes into. So it's perfectly normal to have support. I think sometimes business people as well think that they have to do it all in order to be successful. And I think building a really strong team is helpful. And finding an accountant or bookkeeper that also wants to work with you, not just take the work from you and tell you how it is, show you and work with you towards your goals and show you the financials. You don't necessarily need to go and memorize the tax rules in order to be a successful business person. That's probably not a great use of your time. But again, having that financial awareness and that financial understanding of your business is helpful, but you don't have to do it alone.
As yoga teachers and business owners, we are often juggling a million things at once. So productivity and efficiency is super important. That's why I'm very excited to be partnering with Magic Mind. Magic Mind is a productivity drink that is made of all natural ingredients and has adaptogens to help decrease stress, nootropics that boost blood flow, and matcha to help keep you focused. I am super sensitive to caffeine, which means that I can't pound coffee all day to stay energized and productive. And that's one of the reasons that I love Magic Mind. There's minimal caffeine, so you can get energized without getting the caffeine jitters and then the caffeine crash. Whether you're someone that needs a boost of productivity in the mornings or the afternoons, Magic Mind is the perfect drink. I love to use Magic Mind for a quick pick-me-up during the afternoon leg, and I love to make it as a matcha latte. It's healthy, it tastes great, and it helps me get into my flow state. If you'd like to experience the benefits of increased productivity and mental energy, you can get Magic Mind at magicmind.co/yoga and use code YOGA20 for 20% off. Once again, that's www.magicmind.co/yoga and use the code YOGA20 for 20% off. And so do you have any other kind of tips or just general best practices for anyone who is out there being like, okay, kicking off the new year strong, I'm going to get myself organized with my financials this year?
Yeah, I think we went over a lot of them, but like you said, is just having that commitment. And I think the new year is a great time to always start with a clean slate. And, no matter what happened in the past, or if you struggled or you forgot things, or there was some tax hiccups, like that's normal and that's fine. And just get organized with all the kind of ways that we kind of talked about.
Amazing. Thank you for all of that. And I'm curious, are there any other business lessons or anything like that you've learned through your career that you want to share with listeners today?
Yeah, I would just say, as far as business lessons, just keep trying. I know it's kind of cheesy to say that if you failure is really a success, but I really truly believe that. And you can't fail if you don't try, but you can't succeed if you don't try either. So trying different avenues, getting creative, and again, realizing that it's not personal if it doesn't work out. If you try an avenue and, nobody attends the workshop, it's just neutral information. It doesn't reflect on you. It's completely fine. And there's a lot of that personal work to do through business and through trying things. But I think there's a lot of really beautiful opportunities, and a lot of learning can come from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I feel like I was just having this conversation with a yoga teacher client yesterday who, she's happy with how her year went for 2021, and she's got some amazing goals for 2022 that she's laid out. And she's had a little bit of like a slow kind of December, Christmas time, and she's tried a few things and she's feeling a little bit like, they're not working, but I'm not, giving up quite yet. And I was like, good, you need to keep doing this, sending one newsletter, putting one workshop out there, putting one course out there, and having it be a flop doesn't necessarily mean that, it means nothing really, other than, maybe you need to grow your audience, or, maybe you're not reaching the right people, or maybe it's not the right time of year, or the right time in general. But I think we have to just keep, it's like you kind of got to get back on the horse and keep going, you got to keep trying. And sometimes it takes time and effort and energy, and it can be so hard on our egos, especially, to do that. But, if you really are passionate about it, it's really worth it.
Yeah, I would say one more thing is that if it's not planned, it might not happen. And so what I mean by that is, especially it's great at the beginning of the year to just take the year calendar and start to slot in. I'm going to do a workshop here in the spring. I'm going to try this training in the summer. Because sometimes with those bigger projects too, the amount of work that goes into them, there's actually quite a long runway before that workshop gets launched. It's not, I'm going to think about it and launch it next Tuesday. There's usually a gestation and a creation period that has to happen. So if you kind of know and you plan out the year in advance, or at least things that you'd like to do, you can do that from a financial perspective to make sure that you're going to reach your budgetary goals or projections. But then as well, from like a creative perspective of, I know I'm going to do a retreat in June. So like start thinking about it or meditating on it a little bit, or just getting curious of like what that could be, is really helpful from, a creative and a financial perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's a great piece of advice. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of this, Kristie. This has been really amazing. Can you share where people can go to learn more about you, learn about your services, maybe work with you or reach out if they feel called to do so and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is knicholcpa at knicholcpa.com is the website. I also have Shift Clarity. So shiftthroughclarity.com is my more yoga website, and knicholcpa.com is my kind of accounting services. But they're very much blended. So feel free to reach out to either. Also on Instagram is Shift Clarity. So yeah, would love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a treat to get to chat with you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's good to see you.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Kristie Nichol. Make sure you check her out. And I hope that you've learned a lot and are maybe feeling a bit more empowered about your finances, about your taxes, and just getting organized for this upcoming year. And if you were a Canadian yoga teacher who is looking for a trustworthy accountant, I've worked with Kristie for the last couple tax seasons. She's really incredible. So if you are looking for that, just make sure that you do reach out to her. And of course, a big shout out to OfferingTree and Magic Mind for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can head on over to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om to check them out and get a little discount. And you can head on over to magicmind.co/yoga and use the code yoga20 for 20% off. And thank you for listening to this episode of the show. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.